introduce Marla, who's with ASA, and Marla's going to introduce herself and the rest of the panel. And we're so grateful that you have taken time to speak with the community and with us. So Marla, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. So happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. So I'm Marla Isaacson. I'm the moderator for today's discussion, Grow Your Audience Inside Podcast Growth Hacks Used by Industry Experts. So I want to introduce my terrific panel here. First, I'd like to introduce Andrea Jones. Hi, Andrea.
Hello.
Hi. So Andrea is the host of the Savvy Social podcast, creator of the Savvy Social School, and named one of Social Report's top marketers to follow. Crystal Profit, hey Crystal, is the host of the Profit podcast, helping podcasters start, launch, and market their shows. Author of Start a Binge-Worthy Podcast and founder of the program Profit Podcasting. Karen Yankovich, hey Karen, host of the podcast Good Girls Get Rich, love that title. LinkedIn marketing expert, helping clients find their social voice so they can bring in new business and more profits. Karen's also the founder of Get Linked Up Training. And I'm Marla Isaacson, the host of the podcast Mind of a Mentor and founder of ASA, a podcast network consisting of over 1,000 podcasts connecting women-hosted podcasts with women-focused brands in order to increase the representation and influence of women's voices worldwide. I'm also very grateful that these experts are members of the ASA community. So my great thanks. So a couple of points to start the conversation, a few stats just to frame everything. So there are now over, this cracks me up, I can't believe it. There are now over 1,750,000 podcasts, according to Podcast Insights, versus in early June 2018, 550,000 that were confirmed by Apple. The growth is just astronomical. And we also know that there are over 43 million episodes as of January 2021. So that's crazy. We also know, and this is the reason why we're here, that a key pay point for both beginners as well as very experienced podcasters is how to grow your audience, how to help your podcast gain more subscribers and listeners, especially with the craziness and the activity going on in the industry. Your podcast really needs to stand out. So I'm going to start with you, Crystal. You work with podcasters to help them create and market their shows. What are the key tips, key hacks that you recommend as people are starting their show?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Marla, for having me and for being part of this awesome panel. Podcast marketing is one of my favorite things. Like I tell everyone in my audience, I'm like, I am just so geeky and nerdy about podcasting. It makes my life so happy. And podcast marketing is right up there at the top. So the first question that I want everyone to ask, whether you are new, you're a seasoned podcaster, wherever you are in your journey, is how can your podcast stand out in the sea of all the other podcasts? It's the $1 million question that you have to ask yourself and understand before you can even think about implementing some of the strategies that Andrea and Karen are going to share with you today that have to do with social media or just promoting your show. And the underlying factor there is branding. You have to ask yourself, what sets my show apart? And what I always tell podcasters is, what's special about you? What is something that you can add to your brand that only you have? Because there's so many podcasts that are out there and people always come to me and they're like, but somebody else is already doing that or they do it better. And like, how can I even get started? They're so scared to even start. And so what I like to tell people is, I hate laundry. What does that have to do with branding, right? So I tell my people all the time, I hate laundry. And how is that relevant to branding or to my podcast? Well, for a good 2 years, I recorded my podcast in my closet, which is where I shove all of my laundry that I don't want to deal with in my life. Y'all, I have 3 kids. I have 5 people in this house. We have a lot of laundry all the time. And for me to bake in that little piece of my personality and really showcase that through my podcast, I was able to connect with my audience on a deeper level, because now they're not just coming to me to learn podcasting. They're coming to me because they relate to me. They understand me because they're like, I hate laundry too, girl. I shove it in the corner. I don't deal with it. I put it in the laundry and I click like redo over and over in the dryer cycle. Y'all know this. Like, I know I'm not the only one that does this. You turn it on, you fluff it up in the dryer. But this has everything to do with branding. So I want to tell you a quick story about Office Ladies. This is my favorite podcast. Most people are probably familiar with it. Angela Kinsey, Jenna Fisher from The Office, their show has been branded so well. I'm such a geek about this, y'all. I did a whole case study on Office Ladies. And what I love about their brand is they've been able to go a level deeper with their audience because Angela is from Texas. I'm from Texas. They say quirky things on their show that other people are like, that's not actually a saying. I think only people in Texas say that, but I get it. I totally relate to it. They have product line and merchandise that's related to the ridiculous things that we say in Texas that apparently the rest of the world doesn't say. And I love this. So branding is pointing out the quirky parts of your personality. It's really getting connected to your listeners on a deeper level. So that's number one. Okay. Number one growth hack. You have to have a branding strategy. What sets you apart? Number two is kind of the opposite of what most people talk about, and that is inconsistency. You will hear so many people talk about how to be consistent, how to do this, how to do that. But at the core of that are your inconsistencies. So you have to ask yourself, what am I not doing on a consistent basis? Because if you can't point that out, I could give you all the repurposing strategies and the abilities to do all the fun things that Andrea and Karen are going to share with you today about social media. But if you have inconsistencies in your message and how you speak to your audience, none of that matters. So you have to kind of hold a mirror up to your own brand and your own podcast and say, where are my inconsistencies, whether it's sporadic podcast publishing and not being consistent on your social media platforms or your email list or your website. And you have to make sure that you address those. Don't let those inconsistencies become a problem in your messaging. Because I love Donald Miller and his book, Building a Story Brand. And he says over and over, if you confuse, you lose. And that is so important to understand that you don't want to lose your audience. You don't want to be unclear in your message. And then the third point that I want to share with you today is all about repurposing. And it really does go back to what we already on these other two principles before you can start with the higher level repurposing strategies, like really strategic things. So make sure that you have a very clear message with your brand and that you are not confusing your audience, because they'll come to you and then they'll say, Crystal, I hate laundry too. You get me. Like, we're on the same page. We can be best friends now. So that's what I have to share with you today about growing your audience, growing your show. Is make sure your brand message is clear. Make sure you are taking care of those inconsistencies and have those down before you ever start trying to get super strategic and really fancy with repurposing your message.
So, Crystal, question for you. You talk a lot about your audience, which is obviously very critical, but a very important part of starting out, and I know you share this with your clients, is figuring out who is your audience.
Right.
Any hacks, any thoughts on how to help people narrow that down? Because podcaster can't talk to everyone.
Right.
So if you could talk about that for a second.
Yeah. So this is going to sound kind of funky, but I mean it in all sincerity. You have to become obsessed, not in a creepy way, but you have to become obsessed with understanding who you're talking to. And a lot of people will say, well, I don't know. I'm publishing stuff and I'm putting it out there. Well, ask people, create a community, whether it's a free Facebook group, an email list, you're connecting with people on Clubhouse, wherever it is. I want to make sure that you are becoming obsessed with your audience, because they will tell you what they want. They vote with their downloads, right? People say you vote with your dollars. People will vote and tell you with their downloads, because if you put out 10 pieces of content, there's probably going to be one piece that performs really well. And then you go back, maybe you post another podcast episode related to that, and you ask your people, what did you like about this? What just made you say, oh, this was so good? And just continuously ask questions. Ask your audience, what did you like? And I think one of the best ways to do this is on social media too. So your email list, social media, having those communities where you can have a two-way conversation with your audience is also super important.
Thank you, Crystal. So let me turn to Andrea now. Your agency and podcast focuses on maximizing social media to grow your business and your show. So as a podcaster, which channel, in your opinion, seems to work best for podcast marketing? And also, what special hacks do you recommend? The age-old question of social media and podcasting.
Yes, I love talking about this. So let's dig in. Before I give my favorite platform, the one I see podcasters shining on the most, I'd love to know, for those of you joining us live, if you can put yours in the chat. Which platform do you hang out on the most as your podcast or either as your own personal brand? I'd just be curious to know. I see Kathy says Instagram. Instagram is definitely a popular one for a lot of podcasters. Dan says Twitter. Brett says LinkedIn. I'll let Karen take the LinkedIn questions. Jacob says Instagram and Twitter. Okay, perfect. So lots of Instagram and Twitter, and those are my favorite top two platforms for podcasters. Now, if you're just starting out, definitely pick one and pick the one that already is your preference. So if you log on to Twitter and you go, I don't like this app, I much prefer Instagram, then use Instagram. Because if you're much more likely to use it, if you actually enjoy it, then you'll actually use it. If I tell you you have to be on Twitter and you log on and you just don't like it, then you're not likely to use it. But as far as communities go, Twitter has a very vibrant podcasting community. Just start searching for podcasting hashtags, go to the podcast movement page and see who's liking and retweeting that content. There's a ton of amazing podcasters on that platform, and you can definitely find your people there. Instagram also has a very vibrant community for podcasters as well, and you get more creativity with some of the Instagram features like carousel posts, Instagram Reels, and Instagram Stories that just seem to be more used features of the platform than they are on Twitter. As far as hacks go, one of my favorites to teach podcasters is how to write a caption that actually converts people on social media.
Okay.
So yes, sometimes as podcasters, we get super excited about what we post, about our content. We just go, blah, podcast, here, listen, go. And while that's great because we're super excited, from the consumer perspective, they go, who is this person? I just saw a dog video and my sister's baby, and now I'm seeing this podcast in my feed, and I don't really remember what it's about. So I want you to craft your podcast caption that really pulls the reader in. So the first thing you want to do is have an intention-grabbing statement right at the top. Something that will really encourage people to click the read more option, because a lot of times on social media, our captions are kind of cut off a little bit by the platform. And then you want to list out the benefits and really focus in on the feelings that you want someone to have or that they do have while enjoying your show. So if you have audio drama, instead of saying this week we investigated a haunted house in California, you may want to say, tune in because about 3 seconds in, the hair on your arms were raised, and wait till the end because there's a surprise twist. You don't want to miss it. Like, that kind of language is definitely more feeling focused and really helps pull the reader in. And then the last thing is you want to have a very clear call to action when it comes to your captions. A podcast, strangely enough, as popular as they are, some people still get a little confused about how to find it, how to listen to it, where to download. And so you want to be crystal clear about what that process is like. So for me, most of my listeners are on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So in every single post, I say the name of my podcast and listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And then if they do want to listen on, the web player embedded on my website, I also include that link as well.
So, Andrea, quick question. So many of us have a personal Instagram page. Maybe if we have another business, we have a business Instagram page, and then we have our podcast. So what do you recommend? Do we need a podcast Instagram page? How do we make that all make sense? Because it's a whole lot of social media to have to manage. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is. And I definitely, sorry if you can hear my dog barking, I definitely love this question. And I did a whole podcast episode on this specifically because it's one of my most popular questions. Because as podcasters, we want to do all of the things. But what I recommend is that you pull your podcast page into your brand. So that way you have one page where someone can come and find out all of the juicy information about what you do. You could also talk about your personal life, you could talk about your business, and you can talk about your brand, okay? All in one page. And yes, it's possible. I can attest to that. Now, if you have a podcast that has a co-host, then you may want to explore different options like having another page, or if you aren't the host of your podcast, let's say it's just something you produce and there's maybe like a team of contributors, then you may want to have a separate page. But in that case, hopefully your co-hosts or contributors can also help you manage that page. But managing multiple accounts is a lot for one person.
Yeah. So one thing, and you've touched on it, is discoverability and managing a network. Sometimes it is really hard for me to find people and to find their podcasts. So I think from my perspective, it's just really important to think about, how do I want people to find me? Where, and figure out then where to put your hashtags, your information. Because sometimes I have to dig pretty deep to actually figure out who's the podcaster, where are they, how do you find them? So anything about that, just in terms of discoverability, Andrea, that you want to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. And with discoverability, you kind of have to put yourself in the spot of your listener. So imagine how they are going to find you. So some people search through hashtags on Instagram, but most often our listeners, or I don't know if it's just me, but I find podcasts through other recommendations. And so you want to create the kind of content that people share so that you can pull them into your audience. So a great way to do this is if you're interviewing someone, pull a quote from the episode. People love sharing those to their stories or retweeting them. If you want to create some sort of interactive component, like a question or a poll that really helps push your post up into the feed. But if you are in this place where you're brand new and you don't have an audience yet who can share, you're going to have to put yourself out there. And it's a lot like dating. If I can use a dating analogy for a sec, let's say you're on the hunt for your person and you decide, I'm going to, buckle down and find my longtime partner. You could just sit in your home and like wait for someone, maybe like the mailman or someone can come in and get a little frisky. But most often, you're probably going to sign up for the apps. You're probably going to tell your friends. You're probably going to ask for connections and, maybe go out to coffee shops and meet people. And so the same thing is for your podcast. Now, just like with dating, not every single person you make eye contact with is going to become the one. So not every single person you connect with on social media is going to become a listener, but you've got to put yourself out there and put yourself in front of people to open yourself up for that possibility. So an example would be if you have a yoga podcast, let's say you talk about yoga and you love the yoga industry, go to someone like Yoga with Adriene on YouTube. She does not have a podcast, by the way, but her listener or her followers are all about yoga. They love her stuff. So if you could become a part of that community by liking and commenting and participating, and people know that you also have a podcast, there's a potential there for connection. But again, this isn't like that creepy person who like comes up to you and goes, I want to get married like right now, right away. It's got to be like a slower build, more organic relationship building strategy.
Okay, that's scary, Andrea, but I get your point. Thank you. This is super helpful. So Karen, LinkedIn, so important. What an amazing tool. And I think you share the same point. I don't think enough people take advantage of LinkedIn. So can you talk about some of the key hacks you use with LinkedIn, in terms of helping people increase followers and subscribers? I love LinkedIn.
So shout out to Brett, the only person that mentioned LinkedIn. So shout out to you, Brett. So Marla, when you asked about your discoverability question, do you know that LinkedIn, and I don't know exactly if this is true, but it's been told to me, and it's close. If it's not the #1 content hub on the internet is LinkedIn.
Wow.
So if you are not posting your shows and your show episodes and things like that to your LinkedIn account, to your LinkedIn as articles, then you're missing out on a big piece of discoverability. But that isn't even what I'm here to talk about today. What I really want to talk about today is less about your show and more about you as the host, because LinkedIn is really about your personal brand. And, Crystal mentioned, what makes you different. Here's what I want to see that makes you different. As podcasts become more and more, as they grow, right? 1.7 million podcasts. One of the things that I think many podcasters don't, or I know many podcasters don't understand, is that we, positioned properly, are the media. So when you shift your mindset a little bit to being the podcast host that is the media, and you start to show up that way, right? And you start to build relationships from that standpoint and creating a LinkedIn profile that lets people know that, well, listen, people think podcasts and they think you're recording in your basement in your underwear or in your closet amidst your dirty laundry, right? So you need to have something that has you standing out from that to really let people know that you are professional, that you have a background in whatever it is your topic is, that you want to connect with people on that host to host level, right? So thinking about, instead of going for the individual person that's searching for your podcast, I want you to think bigger and think, who else has a podcast that has an audience of people that would be interested in your podcast? And again, if you're positioned properly on LinkedIn, and then you start to build relationships on LinkedIn with those other podcast hosts, not just connecting with them, but saying, I listened to episode 13. I have a little bit of a different approach to that, but honestly, I love what you said about this and this, and I shared it with my audience, and I've tagged you, right? You're really providing service of other people in your industry, other podcast hosts. They may pretend, if they have a show that has a guest format, bring you onto their show as a guest. And now you're getting your show in front of their entire audience. Take that same concept. Who writes about the kinds of things that you're an expert in? What are the TV shows, the radio shows, the magazine journalists that write about the kinds of things, or that produce the kinds of programs that you are expert in? And are you using LinkedIn to build relationships with them? I have seen many, many, many media panels. And every single time I see a media panel, they say, connect with me on social media, connect with me on LinkedIn if you've got something that you think I would be interested in. Imagine if, and this has happened to my clients, imagine if, your the host of this podcast is getting featured in, NBCnews.com or, other types of media like that. And it isn't about pitching them. It's truly about, same as the podcast, finding the articles or the stories that they've written and sharing that with your audience and tagging the journalist or whoever it is that wrote that article or produced that piece. And they want you to, they love when we share their stuff. We love when people share our stuff, right? So of course they love when you share their stuff, and it's putting you on their radar in a very, on a positive level, right? Not just pitching or asking. It's just being of service and sharing. And it's such a great energy to be connecting with people. So I really want you to think about LinkedIn. First, you've got to create a profile that really positions you like an influencer. Do you say, I'm the host of the Good Girls Get Rich podcast? Do you have that in there? Do you share your episodes? Do you use the episodes in the featured section, right? Really position yourself as you're worthy of their time. And then do some outreach and make sure you're connecting on a very consistent, but a very micro-targeted level, other podcast hosts, other people in the media that talk about your topic, sponsors, right? Potential sponsors for your podcast, right? Connecting with these people, and then literally look to get on the phone with them and just have actual relationships, actual conversations. And it's going to grow your show, instead of 1 download at a time, 100 or 1,000 downloads at a time.
So Karen, quick question, and this is more of a mindset question. Mm-hmm. There are members on our community or on the platform that say, well, my podcast is my passion project. It's not really my core business. Why should I be on LinkedIn? Can you talk about that? Because I think, I don't agree with that.
Well, it's okay. And that's okay. So LinkedIn is for you if you're looking to grow, you want your show featured on other people's shows, you want to be a guest on other people's shows, you would love your podcast to be mentioned in news articles on CNBC or whatever's interesting to your industry, right? Mm-hmm. Or if you're looking for sponsors. So it's really the relationship based. If you're cool with doing a podcast and having a few downloads every month and you're doing it for fun, then maybe you don't need to be on LinkedIn. But if you want a bigger audience, if you want sponsors, if you want media attention and more visibility to your podcast, then there's nothing that's going to get that for you faster than LinkedIn.
Thanks. I totally agree with you. So, question about community. So each one of us have communities, and we understand the importance of communities, the importance of creating a strong community. What hacks have you used with your podcasts, your businesses, to really use community to help grow your show? Can you talk about that? Andrea, I'll start with you first.
Yes. So I think sometimes we think of our podcast as a silo. Like it is this thing that we put out there and that's the beginning and end. But if we start positioning our podcast as the start of a community, if we start thinking about it that way, it could be very helpful. So one of my favorite things to do is to create content around the podcast as well. So we talk a lot about podcast repurposing and content repurposing. So if I have an episode on, for instance, should you have one Instagram account or two, then I'm also going to ask that question separate of the podcast in the feed. In my post, maybe I'm going to ask that question to my audience. Maybe I'm going to go live and talk about the different options around that. Maybe I'm going to post an Instagram reel that's kind of funny about deciding between one Instagram post or two. So that type of content really helps create a community around the podcast instead of the podcast being the only thing that you're talking about. And essentially what you want is people to go, oh, she gets it. She gets me. She understands where I'm coming from. And so that could really help with that community building aspect. And then the other thing I will say goes right along with what Karen was saying and what Crystal was saying, in the sense that you want to build relationships and establish relationships with the right people. Especially now, 2021, it is very challenging to start from zero without relationship building. Mm-hmm. So a lot of your hacks to growing your show and building that community is going to start with making some strategic partnerships with people who can grow with you. Maybe you can also be on their show. They can share your show out, collaborating with them, even from a social media perspective, doing maybe a joint giveaway or going live together. So those types of partnerships can really help multiply any community growth that you do have already.
So I love that you mentioned something on. Also, we have a program called PodSwap because we know that a very good way to grow your show is to be guests on other people's show. So I think encouraging that is super important. So Crystal, talk about community.
Yes. So like I said, become obsessed with your people and then don't shut up about your community. I know that sounds too simple, but it really is true. I hear podcasters say all the time, like, well, I created a Facebook group. Like, let's just pick on Facebook groups for a second, right? Because I hear all the time, it sounds like a good idea, but no one's coming. No one's showing up. No one's engaging. But then when I ask them, well, when was the last time you mentioned your Facebook group on your podcast? They kind of look at me like, oh, I'm supposed to do that more than just one time? I'm like, yes. Like these principles are so simple, but again, going back to inconsistencies, if you want to see your community grow, they have to know where to go to get in touch with you, whether it's your email list, your Facebook group. If you're building a community somewhere else online, you have to tell people about it, and I recently heard a statistic, one of the basic principles of marketing is you think about a billboard, right? You have to see it 12 times to even really see it. Well, we have so much content coming at us now that I think that number has jumped to like 20 or 24 times that someone has to see an ad, see a post, like see your information, your brand in front of them before they get it, before it actually clicks, before someone says, oh, that's for me. So what I tell all my students, all my clients is keep talking about your podcast and keep talking about your community and keep telling them the benefits that they will see. Whether it's a community like ASA where you tell them, hey, if you want to connect with other female podcasters, this is where you need to go. Or if you want to be featured on other people's podcast, this is how we can help you get there. So continuously talking about your community, what you offer to new members, existing members, or even some fun things that you have planned in the future. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to have a strategy to know exactly how you're going to grow your community. You just have to keep offering it to the people that you want to join you. So that would be my tips.
And I also think people really want to talk to each other.
Yeah.
So, and to me, that's such a core part of the value of a community. So Karen, talk about community from a LinkedIn perspective.
Well, I can tell you that LinkedIn is really not known for their community efforts. Okay, their groups are not great. It's really for building relationships one-to-one, human to human, right? But I have a Facebook community, from a LinkedIn for Women community, right? And so my podcast and my Facebook group are both kind of like the front end of my business, and it all supports each other. So I look to continue to grow my Facebook group, because it feeds my podcast, which feeds my business, and it all kind of feeds each other. But I think it's important that, like somebody had said, like that there's people can talk to other people. They're not just getting responses from me on the Facebook, in my Facebook group. Other people can weigh in and get, they can get responses from other people. So it really does become a place that they can support each other. And often, depending on your audience, especially like my audience are entrepreneurial women, right? They may not be getting a lot of support from their friends and family who don't understand entrepreneurs, right? They have pensions, paychecks. Mm-hmm. So when they join the communities like that, they have some support that they might not even have known is available to them.
So just want to say one quick thing about, and we've all touched it a bit, but to reiterate, content repurposing. Own it and love it. When you create a podcast, you are actually creating the core of what could be a lot of content. So our experts use content repurposing. Feel free to reach out to them to talk, and they'll talk to you about it. But that's part of having a content strategy. But don't forget, reuse your content. It's hugely important. So I have a final question for everyone before we take questions from the audience. So what is the one hack you wish you knew when you were starting your show? So Crystal, I'm going to go to you.
So we've kind of all touched on this, but it's really understanding who you're talking to. And I say that because when I started, I was so broad. I was like, I want to talk to every woman in the world. Y'all, that is not a good strategy. It's not a good strategy. If that is what your podcast, it's all men or all women, you need to really get more focused, because whenever you can tell the exact person, I talk to entrepreneurs. I don't talk to hobby podcasters. I speak to entrepreneurs, and that really just helps people self-select. This is for me or it's not for me immediately. Someone can say, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not an entrepreneur. So make sure that you get your audience so focused that you could tell, I have 3 kids, like I said, I could go and tell my 12-year-old, this is what my podcast is about. This is who it's for. And he could say, oh, cool. Instead of, what is that for everybody? So make it so simple that someone can immediately say, oh, that podcast is for me, or that podcast isn't for me. And that's okay. If people, you're going to find your people, and it's okay if someone says it's not for me, because your people will be out there, the more focused and the more narrow that you get.
So Karen, turning to you.
Yeah. So, here's the thing. The one thing that I wish I knew, and this is a little bit of and this is definitely a hack. I did not know. So I was blogging, decided I was done with blogging and I wanted to have a podcast. And what I didn't know about podcasting was that I was going to get so many downloads to my back catalog every month. I get downloads to every single episode, every single month for the most part. So when I realized that, I started to panic a little bit and thought, what was I offering people? Where was I sending people in episode 10, right? So my advice to you is buy a URL that says, Karen's free gift, or for me, I have free LinkedIn workshop, and whatever is my newest thing now goes to those URLs so that I'm not continually having to maintain things that I might not be doing anymore. I can always repoint a URL and you'll get my most recent thing there. But I started to kind of panic a little bit and say, I don't want to lose these people. If they're reaching out to me for something, I want them to still be able to get it. And I, as an entrepreneur, I can't have pages all over the place that are live forever. So that's my tip. Understand that as you're giving people a call to action, whether it's to your Facebook group or whether it's to something else, that keep in mind that people might be downloading it a year from now, right? And that you have to be ready for that. Make it easy for yourself.
Andrea.
Yeah, so this is a strategy I just started this year that I wish I was doing in the beginning, which is recording my podcast as videos and posting them on YouTube. Mm-hmm. So the actual view count on YouTube doesn't even come close to comparing to my download numbers. However, I cannot tell you how many times someone goes, oh my gosh, I found you on YouTube. And then I went to Spotify and binge listen your whole back catalog. And so for me, that's something I wish I was doing before, because my process really hasn't changed that much. I don't do a lot of editing to my shows anyways. And so it was just a simple no-brainer thing. Now I do have to, put my lipstick on and, do my hair, whatever the case may be. So it's a few extra minutes to get prepared. But having those shows on YouTube has increased my reach essentially because of the discoverability factor built into YouTube. It is the second largest search engine in the world. So I'll use the podcast episode we already talked about, which is, should I have one Instagram account or two? That's a question people will type into YouTube. And while it's a podcast episode, it's also a video on YouTube. So in the intros of my episode, I always make sure to say this is also podcast and a video on YouTube. It's in the description as well, because a lot of people do like to listen on the go. But that's one of those things where I just try to think about how big my show would be if I started my YouTube channel with the podcast when I launched my podcast in 2018.
You said it. YouTube is such a very powerful search engine. So when you're posting your shows on YouTube, also making sure that the description consists of your keywords is super important. It's a huge winning strategy, and I recommend doing that as well. So my thing or tip that I wish I knew when I first started out is that I'm having a conversation. It's not an interrogation. And I wish I knew that when I first started, because I was petrified. And when you're interrogating something, it's pretty darn awkward. So to me, the joy of podcasting, especially if you're conversing with guests, is to really have that back and forth conversation. I think it's super important, and it's a great way to learn about what the person is talking about. And I just think it makes it for a much better podcast. And I'm just thinking about the first 10 episodes I ever recorded. Oh my gosh, horrible. So I think now we can, if there are any questions from the community or our listeners here, anything that we need to, have we seen anything?
Well, there was a question earlier from Brett, and I kind of answered it in the chat, but I can talk through it a little bit, which was, let me just find it. Karen, can you dive a bit more into the importance of LinkedIn articles? So here's the deal. So with LinkedIn articles, there's no audio player. So in a perfect world, this doesn't happen every week. In fact, it probably hasn't happened in 6 months. But in a perfect world, what I would do is use the show art. I have different art every week for my show. So use the show art as the header image, copy and paste my show notes, put a link at the top of it that says, listen to the full episode with a link to wherever I want to send them, usually my website. And what I like to do for YouTube, and I haven't been doing it very well lately, is Well, and actually you talked about it, Andrea. You talked a little bit about creating a promo. I like to create a promo video that just says, you guys have to listen. Minute 3 is where I go into this or that, right? That's great to share, but that you can put on YouTube, add all your show notes, you get all that good Google juice, but also then use that video in the LinkedIn article. So now you've got the header image, you've got the video, the little promo video, a link underneath it that says, listen to the full episode at your show notes. And then at the bottom, I add, like a little bio and follow Karen at all these other places. But it's literally copy and paste from my website. And you guys, if anybody here is an SEO expert, I am not, but I've asked many of them if that's an issue, and I've been told it's not. That as long as I'm changing it up a little bit, I also don't do it the same week as the show. I tend to just go with my back episodes and put something on a LinkedIn article with an older episode that I haven't shared there yet. And sometimes it's a good 6 months or longer after the episode originally aired on my website.
So we do have a question. I don't know if I can answer it, but so here's the question. But if I have a podcast on Anchor, most of my audience is not Spotify or Apple Podcast. How do I find out which 54% who listen to me from another platform? I don't have that. Do we know? We can get back to you on that, but Andrea, if you know.
Yeah, Anchor doesn't have the best stats when it comes to podcasting. It's really great to get started sometimes, but as you start building up your audience, I would suggest switching to a platform that has a bit more stats so that you can kind of get some more of that data.
So that's an interesting point. Crystal, when you're talking to people in terms of helping them start their show, do you talk to them about which hosting companies to use and how to work with hosting companies?
Yeah, I mean, there are many that are coming on the scene that have come and gone since I started. And the one that I default to that I've been using since day one is Buzzsprout. And it's simply because they gave me an option. Y'all, I've told you several times, I have 3 kids. I'm very frugal. Actually, I'm cheap. And I liked that they offered me 90 days for free. So I went with Buzzsprout. But I know that there are many hosting companies out there that have really cool features. And again, it goes back to the audience. So these different hosting companies have different features that make sense for different podcast hosts. So when you're shopping around looking for a host, make sure that you try to find someone that works within your budget. They offer you the services that you're looking for, and they offer you the support that you need whenever you're just getting started. But I agree with Andrea. It's Anchor has been, I get questions all the time about Anchor, and I can't speak to it because I've never used it, but I do know that it is a great platform to get started, but it may not be the one to continue to grow and monetize your show if you're using your podcast as part of your business. So,
and I just see a comment here from Kathy. Libsyn does YouTube automatically for you, and you get great stats, and also Facebook. So that's good to know for those people who are thinking about hosting companies and what to do and hosting companies to work with. Okay. Any other questions?
Someone has their hand raised. So
okay.
I've never done this feature before, but it says that Kathy's requesting mic access. So I feel like we're on Clubhouse all of a sudden and people are like, hey, can I talk? But I don't know how to add her as someone who can ask a question.
Yeah,
there's also a question from Dot Cannon that says, what works best for starting an email?
Oh, here we go.
Hey, hi, Kathy.
There's Kathy.
So my podcast is about a rare disease. I speak to women that have this rare disease, and I share information with them. And I have a LinkedIn account, but it's like dormant. I just, I actually was trying to reach one of the doctors so I could try to get them onto my podcast to talk about it. So I created the LinkedIn account. But I've not touched it. And when you were talking about using LinkedIn the way you were, Karen, it kind of set a light bulb off for me. But I have I can't repurpose my content like you do to create articles because my audience is not on LinkedIn. My guest might be on LinkedIn, but my core audience, they're, they could be on there, but they're not talking about what I'm talking about on there. Does that make sense?
That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. I mean, honestly, the lowest on the totem pole of things to use LinkedIn for is to go straight for the downloads or straight for the clients. It's the higher level relationships that it's great for. Finding great guests, having an opportunity to be a guest on someone else's show. And the articles that I mentioned, here's the deal with them. The reason I love articles, even aside from the fact that it's on the Content Hub, right, which gives us discoverability. It is a permanent part of your profile. So if somebody's checking you out, the articles are part of your profile. It's not like a Facebook post or even a LinkedIn post that disappears as the wall grows. The articles stay as a permanent part of your profile. So if somebody's checking you out as maybe they want to sponsor your podcast or they want to have you as a guest on their podcast, having your articles there gives you the opportunity to be seen more. They can understand a little bit more about who you are. So don't think about LinkedIn as like, where your clients are or where your downloads are. Look at it for those higher level relationship opportunities. Who are the people that you would die to meet if you could, related to your podcast? And then let's use LinkedIn to find those people.
So, but for my articles, I guess my question is, for my articles, do I do like you do and put my show notes up there, even though the guests are not like looking for that? Like who would research me? I mean, you know what I mean?
LinkedIn is all about your personal brand, and those articles establish your credibility and your personal brand.
Thank you.
And so, okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Any more questions?
There's an episode on my podcast about this, and feel free to reach out. I'm happy to chat with you.
Okay.
Okay, so I see someone else raise their hands. Did I do this right? Yeah. Sean.
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Sean.
How are you, ladies?
Good.
Good.
All right. Apparently you can't see me though, but I guess that's okay. Here we go. Take my camera off. There we go. Hello. How are you?
Hey.
First of all, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. I have a very unusual podcast. We've been on the air for about 4 years, and our podcast pays homage to two DJs that were here in Los Angeles for 25 years. So we've kind of mimicked their show to become our show, and then we throw our own things in. So we know who our audience is overall. We're going after the old listeners of the people who used to listen to that radio program. The thing is that now we're trying to get sponsorship for our podcast. So the question I have for you is that we just did our first LinkedIn. I guess what I'm trying to say. I guess our we have a LinkedIn thing for the podcast itself. What is the best way to approach people that we feel that will be good sponsorships for our show overall? I know, I think it was Karen, you mentioned about trying to develop those relationships and everything, but what is a good way to approach them to say, hey, we would like to have a conversation with you?
Well, I'm going to let Marla answer that since she is the sponsor queen.
I mean, I think it really goes back to what we've been talking about, which is really knowing who your end customer is. Mm-hmm. Who is your listener? So profile your typical listener. Who is this person? What are their interests? What products do you think they use? So you got to do a deep dive as to who you think your audience is, who is your audience. Okay. Do the research and figure out the kinds of products and services they're using, and then go to the same companies or similar companies in that vertical. I think that's a really good way to start.
Okay, but how do we approach those companies? What should we say to them to hopefully that they will begin a conversation with us?
I think you need to introduce yourself and just say, it's all about what you can do for someone. Right. So I think it's really important to talk about who you are, what you do, and how you can help that other person, how you can help this particular sponsor. The sponsor may want to reach your audience and may not have the ability to do so. So I think it's really understanding how you can provide service to them, and in turn, they will be able to help you. Because remember, it's not always that easy for brands to find the best audiences. So if you know who your audience is, that's a great piece of information to convey to a brand.
And Sean, what I would do is go to their LinkedIn company page if they have one.
Absolutely.
Go to the list of their employees and find the employees that you think have the titles that might be involved with, or help you with your conversation about a sponsorship. And so it may not even be that they're the person, but if they can introduce you to the person, right, that handles that. So, and I don't know, Marla might have a better idea of what those titles might be, but you want to, and maybe it's different for every sponsorship, right? But you want to look for you want to go within there. And again, you're not reaching out like, hey, corporation, I want you to be a sponsor. You want to go to the individual people and say, hey, Joe, I've got this podcast. I really love your product, blah, blah, blah. I talk about it all the time. I'd love to, consider have a conversation with you about how I can get you more visibility or whatever, right? And just have again, it's all about conversation.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. All right, cool.
If I can add to that a little bit too,
Andrea,
I would say, when you're bundling up the packaging, so this may be after you've had an initial conversation, some of the things my students and clients really see add value to these podcast sponsorship deals is to add in things like additional social media posts, shout outs to their email newsletter list. So if you have other places that you can leverage along with the podcast, sometimes that could really help showcase your authority a little bit more and sweeten the deal a little bit for them.
Yeah, one thing I noticed with us was that our downloads are fairly low numbers overall, but yet the people that we're able to reach out are extremely high numbers, especially on Facebook. And so we promote our shows twice a week. Normally it's Friday. We let everybody know what's going to be on the show tomorrow. And in Mondays, if they miss the show, now you're able to download it here, and here's the link for it. And on average, we're hitting about anywhere between 6,000 to 7,000 people per post. And we promote that to about 70 different groups on Facebook. And that's been pretty consistent with us.
That tells me you have a lot of influence with your consumers. And that's something that you can leverage because the brands want to talk to your consumers and you know who they are.
Right. So offering something, I guess, on that post for them or whatever.
Absolutely. I mean, what channels do you have in addition to your podcast? How can you package it to create something that's valuable to the brand so that the brand can actually connect best with your audience?
Yeah. And then we recently also just got syndication on 2 other networks also.
Oh, hello. You're doing great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right.
It's taking us a while, but we're getting there slowly, though.
Awesome. All right, we have another raised hand.
Thank you, ladies. Take care.
Take care. Did I do this right? I'm clicking. Dot.
Hi. Thank you for a great panel, first of all. My question, I have a long-running podcast about creativity, the intersection of art and science, and I'm going to finally bite the bullet, I think, and make an email list. But how do I do that without being really annoying and without it taking up a lot of time?
Oh, you're talking to the right people. Between Crystal and Andrea, go for it. And Karen.
Yeah, I'll jump in real fast. So Dot, thank you so much for being here. And this is such a great question because I know that we love the sexiness and the shininess of all the things that come with social media. And it's really one of those things that you can see immediate numbers, right? Because maybe you have a post that goes viral and you see something that just like takes off, for whatever reason, but then whenever you put up a post, like whether it's a promotion or something, you're having an event, you're launching a book, whatever it is that you're doing, and then you just promote it on social media, it lands on crickets and you're just like, what happened? Well, sometimes it gets lost for many reasons. And I will let Andrea speak to the algorithm and how I don't understand it. This is not my expertise. I will leave that to her. But when it comes to email marketing, you have a very focused audience. they have opted in to hear from you. They want you in their inbox. And if they don't, they'll leave, right? Like it's very simple. People will unsubscribe. So to your question of how do you get started? How do you start adding value? You use your podcast content, and what people are already telling you is really awesome about it. And this is just my approach to it, my perspective, my strategy is I like to tell a good behind the scenes story. This is how I came up with this podcast content. This question was asked in the community. Let me share you a little bit more. It goes back to the branding that we talked about earlier. I like to infuse my brand into my email marketing so people get so excited. I send an email letter every Friday and people are like, what kind of shenanigans is Crystal getting into this week? That's just part of my brand. I make it exciting. I make it interesting because I want people to open my emails. I want them to connect with me. I want them to be excited to hear from me. So find some stories. Think about what made you create the content that you're creating right now. Share that. Tell your people about it because then they'll start to get more excited about what you have to share and hopefully start opening your emails. That way you can utilize the email marketing strategies whenever you're going to promote something in the future.
Great. Thank you.
Andrea.
Yes. So, two simple things you can do to get started as well to piggyback. And then I have a response to your statement, Crystal, because I have thoughts. First thing is you can simply use it as a way to update people that there are new podcast episodes. This is usually the easiest way to start. You can use a tool like MailChimp or even ConvertKit. And they both have landing pages built in and just have a form that says, if you want to get updated when new episodes launch, sign up here. Now, if you want to get a little fancier with it, some of my clients create podcast roadmaps. This is really great as you're building your audience. And it's just a PDF with 5 to 10 episodes for new listeners. So if someone just discovers your podcast, you can say, hey, grab my podcast roadmap. This gives you the first 10 episodes you should listen to. It's a really nice gift for someone if they sign up for your list. In regards to the social media post being buried in the feed, that absolutely happens all the time on social media. It's like my job to figure that out. But one of the things I would challenge you to do is look at the stats of that specific post. Sometimes when we think a post is failing, it actually may not be. So we're looking at metrics like comments or likes. But when we're promoting our podcast, we're actually telling people to go somewhere else and do something else, not like and comment. So take a look at some of the other stats along with the podcast post to see if it actually is performing well or not. But the algorithms don't want you to send people away from their app at all anyways. So if all you're posting is go listen to the podcast, and people keep leaving Instagram or leaving Facebook every time you post, those platforms are going to go, this person is like sending people away. Let's not show their posts anymore, even though it's doing the job that you want it to do. So think about like adding in posts that do encourage engagement as well as promoting.
I love the roadmap. Thank you.
What we also do is we use our email to ask questions of our listeners. So polling your audience, asking for feedback. Everyone loves to be asked for feedback. So that's a really great way to get engagement, not only with your email list, but also a Facebook group if you have one. Karen, any other thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, so you guys all mentioned a little bit about things you can, great emails to send out so that you're not annoying your list. But I want to kind of take a step back and say, one of the ways you can grow that email list is through your podcast. It's a little bit more work, and I know you asked without adding a lot of work. But like, for example, I have a podcast that's like top 3 ways to whatever. I might say at the end, I talked about the top 3 ways, but I've got this great top 10 ways. If you go to, it's, KarenYankovich.com/episode 102 gets you to the show. KarenYankovich.com, /episode 102 download gets you to a download for the top 10 ways. So give them a little more value on the same topic, and it builds your email list that way.
Okay, ladies, I hate to interrupt a really good thing. We have reached our time limit. So before we close out, would each of you just be willing to share where people can connect with you online?
Sure. Crystal, you want to start?
Yes. So everybody can find me. Come hang out with me on Instagram. I'm at Crystal Profit TX, and I'd love to hear what your number one takeaway was from everything that we talked about here today.
Andrea.
I'm at Online Drea on Instagram. It's my favorite platform, so I'll see you over there.
And Karen?
Yeah, and Instagram is not my favorite platform, but I am on there. I'm Karen Yankovich everywhere, but I would love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn, and feel free to tell me that we met here. And if you have any questions for me, or want me to take a quick look at your LinkedIn profile, I'm happy to. If you just ask me in that connection request, I'm happy to do that.
And you can reach me on LinkedIn at ASA-Collective or on Instagram at ASA Collective. Or you can send me an email, marla@asacollective.com.
Ladies, thank you again. This was outstanding. And for anyone that wants to watch the replay, you'll be able to watch that in Podcast Movement University. That's university.podcastmovement.com. It's free. And ladies, thank you. We hope that you have an excellent evening, and look forward to maybe having you back again.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks so much,
Appreciate it.
Karen.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.